Bien, buenos días. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta...
Welcome to the 15th session of the International Seminar. As I stated at the beginning, this is the 5th session of this year. After discussing the commune, the social movement in various areas, this year we're going to talk about we went through the accomplishments of the revolution, then the resistance against the blockade and the impacts. We also knew about the struggling youth in this process of revolution. And also we had the opportunity of become aware of the legacy of Ezequiel Zamora. Today, in this 5th session of the second phase of the seminar, and here we're going to address decolonization of culture in the revolution. To this end, we have a special moderator, a couple of special guests. Our dear friend Pablo Kunich, coordinator of ALBA TV. Pablo is always here, but behind the cameras. He's always making possible this seminar to be broadcast, ensuring the sessions are always ready in the YouTube channel of ALBA TV. So I would like to introduce him for him to coordinate and to moderate this session. So Pablo, you have the floor. Can you hear me? I'd like to be very brief because we want to mainly listen to our guests today. But when we talk about decolonization of culture in the Bolivarian Revolution, we need to go back to our ancestors, to our original population who populated these lands, and they are still here. And they are the very root of our Latin American, Caribbean, Venezuelan culture. We need to talk about the thousands of men and women who arrived here as slaves as a result of the conquest and the violent invasion suffered by our people and our lands. And also, we need to address the encounter between cultures that gave rise to our pain, our suffering, and our identity of resistance against colonialism and imperialism. And as a result, also, given the denial of our culture, we saw the birth of our songs, our cries, our poetry. Those are some of the roots. Also, the colonial and European roots that imposed a language that we speak as a majority in the region, although we still have the indigenous languages, but also that speaks of the legacy of the resistance against the colonial with thousands of heroes who gave their lives to free us from the Spanish yoke. And this is part of the epic of the Bolivarian Revolution, taking root on that legacy. We need to speak about the rentier culture, the terrible legacy of oil that was also forging that identity, creating this identity of our people, and the culture of resistance against the American empire that 100 years ago and today still they're trying to steal our oil. So with the Bolivarian Revolution and Chavez, an opportunity was open to rescue these roots, to rethink them, to give a new approach, a fresh approach, and to start to create an original culture. We can mention, therefore, the first policies implemented, such as inclusion in the education, massive inclusion education, the vindication of our history, with the contradiction on our past and the present. And this enabled us to identify ourselves, to reconnect with our history, with our ancestral history, anti-imperialist and anti-colonial culture, the policy of massive publication and publishing of books, the fresh approach of teaching and education in general, the new fresh approach on media, the creation of new media outlets, some of the accomplishments and some of the policies implemented from the outset of the Bolivarian Revolution in this new stage of the revolution. However, it is not up to me to go in depth in these topics. To that end, we have here two leaders of culture. Mrs. Sojo is graduated in letters, and she has been vice minister in 2014 to 2016 and chair of the publishing house Perro y la Rana, one of the main publishing houses of the revolution. And from that position, she has been a privileged witness and a promoter of this policy of decolonized culture. And today, she will be here as one of the guests. Also, we are going to have Sandino Primera, a musician, folk musician. She is in the tradition of the necessary song, a current that exists in Venezuela and in Latin America, rooted in the liberation processes. He is part of a family of musicians, Soul Muset and Ali Primera, the singer of the people, and he is a reference for the revolution. And now he is working on his own feet, but based on that legacy, and he is facing the contradictions opened by the revolution. Sandino also, he has been deputy of the Constituent Assembly. So these two brothers, sisters, they're going to accompany us. This is just an introduction. I'm an adopted child of Venezuela. I come from Uruguay. I've lived in Venezuela for a long time, but we're going to give the floor to these exceptional comrades. And we're going to go in depth in the colonial approach and what we have done and what we have would still remain to be done in the future.
Giordana, ¿allí me escuchas?
Sí, sí, sí. Comienzo.
Bueno,
Gracias.
si puedes comenzar ya. Gracias a ti.
Gracias, Paco. Gracias a los compañeros y las compañeras.
Thank you, Paco. Thank you, brothers and sisters of ALBA TV. And thank you, you all from the Lingnan University. Thank you very much for accompanying us in the International Center Simon Bolivar, Hernan, and thank you for your invitation. Well, I've based my presentation on my life. When I was 20 years old, I was very much involved in this cultural revolution within the Bolivarian Revolution. And from there, I wanted to tell you about my experience, my history in this framework, my studies in literature, which is the field I work. I'm a bachelor degree in letters. I graduated from a public university. I decided to study Venezuelan and Hispano-American literature, also Greek literature. There was an option, but in the end, I chose another path. Some professors, Briceño Guerrero, for instance, they showed the need to study our own culture and our own language and to study that literature tradition in depth. I thank them for that idea. In the end, I studied Latin American literature. When I graduated, I came to Caracas. I'm living in Caracas currently, and I started to work in the National Council of Culture. And that institution responsible for managing fine arts and culture in the country was being morphed, transformed based on the new cultural policies implemented by the revolution. Therefore, I went through that moment of transformation and change. So I was only 20 years old. I learned a lot in that process, and I contributed in that process of drafting new cultural policies. That was the end of the system based on seeing art as fine art, the elitist aestheticism of arts, and rather go to a more popular and democratic approach of culture. And this is the case uh, when the Constitution was drafted and approved in 1999 with the Constituent Assembly. So for the first time, there is a fresh chapter on cultural rights and the inalienable rights of culture for all Venezuelans. So we analyzed the Constitution, and that is not a minor aspect. The preamble of this Constitution was written by a poet, Gustavo Pereira, and it is an important factor because culture as a right is present in the Constitution, and it's in 2005 when it became a real practice. It was truly implemented in the creation of new cultural policies. I was still very young, freshly graduated. I came to Caracas. I was very moved by the evolution, and I took part in the creation of the new Ministry of the Culture. We only had this Council of Culture that was part of a vice ministry with sports and education. So we created the Ministry of Culture. And in the area of books and literature and edition, I participated in this new ministry, and particularly in the creation of the new publishing house. At the beginning, what we did was to publish massively many books, and Mr. Marquez was there, and many young people leading this process. We worked hand in hand with the guidelines coming from Commander Chavez. And as you know, he was a great reader, and he was always promoting books, and he used to tell poets that he knew by heart. He knew our literature by heart, a great reader of Quixote and the Miserable. So we decided to massively publish these books. 1 million books of the Quixote were published, 500,000 books of Les Miserables of Victor Hugo. So I remember being in the Bolivar squares around the country, distributing the books and people in line that came to the squares to fetch their books. Also, the basic thematic library with various topics, maternity, literature, various topics, health topics. And from that library, more than 30 million books were published, one book per Venezuelan. It was 2004, 2005, when CONAC became the Ministry of Culture as a result of that success, because the response of the people was truly amazing. They were asking for more books, and the book fair became very popular, and they became the party. So the publishing house, a public publishing house was created. We already had Ayacucho and Monte Avila, very much deteriorated because of the policies implemented before Chavismo. There was a process of privatization of those publishing houses. However, with the revolution, those houses were reinforced. However, we created a new publishing house, much more massive and targeting a broad audience. And it is there that I started to work in the conception of this new publishing house, El Perro y la Rana, with the same group of young people between 20, 25 years old, creating with Miguel Marquez and Commander Chavez, of course, this new space. And that was an experience that has marked my existence, to have the opportunity to start from scratch a cultural policy to democratize culture. And we had a lot of resources to do that good. At the time, we had paper, we had a new printing house, we had the whole circuit of the book, we had the printing um, house, we had the libraries, and we have the bookstores created to distribute the books. New The whole chain of book was created until the book fair, writers, promotion of writers, courses for new writers, promotion of reading, and so on. And at that time, in 2005, Venezuela is declared by UNESCO a country free of illiteracy. That was a major achievement. Venezuela, that was very poor, um, and that suffered the Caracazo social unrest. And at the end, we were able to eradicate illiteracy. And we continue in this with this marvelous work with El Perro y la Rana. This public publishing house has published thousands of new books, millions of books published, more than 1,000 new writers that in the past didn't have the possibility to publish because that was very elitist sector. And the Perro y la Rana also published a system of regional printing houses. So not everything was centralized in Caracas. In the provinces, based on local communal publishing committees, they were able to decide what to publish, and they could print them. So we went to Cuba several times. We received their advice on that field, and it was very successful for a while, that project of regional printing houses. Perro y la Rana, when it has gone through various stages, uh, then the harassment sanctions, unilateral sanctions affected the country, and especially the inputs to print. The attack on the currency has affected salaries. Even though I'm no longer part of this publishing house, at the beginning I was part of the foundation. Then I left abroad to study there. I came back. I came back to the publishing house to lead the house without Chavez under harassment in Venezuela, and we still are publishing books. And we published free ebooks, and these ebooks are there. They have more than 300 titles that people can unload, and also license for free commons to adapt to the possibilities of this harassed Venezuela without stopping publishing books and continue giving the people the right to read. In Venezuela, we have a book fair, and they are very popular, and people love them. The last year, because of the pandemic, it was done virtually, but there were some in-person events. I have a video, several videos. The first we could show where we see Commander Chavez talking about reading, and that was edited by us in order to commemorate one of the anniversaries of the publishing house. And Chavez was a great minister of culture because he was very serious about the need to promote culture, book, and reading. And it was part of his life because he loved to read, and he explained how he was transformed by reading. He was learning all the time. I was remember Chavez mentioning Zarathustra in 2000, and in 2011 also quoting that book in a different fashion, that book by Nietzsche. So we see someone who is evolving through knowledge, and he's able to communicate knowledge. That's why he was a driving force in the cultural field, because he can communicate the importance of book and reading, and the role of reading in his own life, and the importance he attaches the people as an active actor and a conveyor of our knowledge. Can we perhaps show this video on Chavez and the importance of reading? Thank you. Can you hear me? Can we please show this video on Chavez and the importance of reading? Yes, we're going to show the video. The sisters, the comrades in China, they're going to show that. Okay.
Hay que leer mucho y mucho.
We must read. We must read a lot. Reading is like music. It's a pleasure. It's a passion. This is why books free us. Awareness free us. Let us read. Let us study. Let us be knowledgeable in order to be free. In order to be enlightened, to have virtues, to understand everything and nothing, to be able to reach sooner or later that destination. It is a moral obligation. We must study, study, and study. So we must know that reading has, amongst many things, not only one goal. However, there is one main goal, and that is to be willing to read, to make a political reading, to make a political interpretation, and more than political, I would say philosophical of the reality. We must understand everything. We cannot be fooled It is the essence of the Bolivarian revolution to be aware of culture. It is a conscience fact. All of those who embark on a process like this one come from here, from the books, because studying and awareness make us free. Bolivar's lives, we must study it. What I'm going to read now is a quote made by Pereira from the Bucaramanga newspaper. This is what Bolivar told Peru de la Croix in Bucaramanga, a marvelous book that was published by the publishing house El Perro y la Rana. They are presenting 300 books, 300 different titles in the Caracas Book Fair, because never before so many books and so many excellent titles had been published in Venezuela. So here we have books, books for culture, books for studying. This is very important. We must study, 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 and read. So through books, we contribute to the effort, to the large effort of education. Sometimes we are reading and you see a whole cataract of beautiful and sublime figures that on one occasion I said, no, I cannot withstand so much beauty. Reading alone is a pleasure, but we must go beyond that. We must read and have reading as a collective act. And from there is the task of the communal councils and the communal council's library. We must exchange knowledge through reading in order to be well-oriented. Democratization of the book and of reading under a new concept of reading as a collective act that will allow us to build another vision of the culture under the values and fundamental principles of the Bolivarian socialism.
Bueno, ahí
vimos algunos fragmentos. We were able to see a few fragments because evidently there are many, many other fragments. There we saw Chavez promoting reading. If you have some free time, please look for his videos when he was reciting Florentino and the Devil by heart. This is a poem that is from Venezuela and it's quite touching. And well, it's a president that quoted that poem right from his heart. There is a very important aspect, and that is that according to the Forbes magazine from Mexico, Venezuela is in the first place within the continent of people who dedicate more hours to reading, 6.3 hours per week. Other surveys put Venezuela in the third place after Mexico and Argentina. And actually, in a country that is under war, that is besieged due to the sanctions, it is important that people are taking the time to read. There's a whole demand for books, for book fairs, for book events, and that is the result of the cultural management that was led by Chávez, but also by many youngsters who were there with him, forming part of the construction of the new cultural policies for reading. Nowadays, I also believe that one of the ways in which we can prove that is based on the number of poets. Venezuela has always been a country filled with poets. Many critics say that there are excellent poets in this country. Nevertheless, poetry is a gender that is quite alive amongst the youngsters of our country. In my case, I don't like to say I'm a poet, but I have dedicated myself mainly during the recent years to cultivate this genre. You can also see that the Nobel Prize was awarded. I don't like to talk a lot about the Nobel Prize because it's quite from the Western world, but well, we can say that more women are being awarded with this prize. And this year with the pandemics, which was a very difficult year, the fact that a female poet won that prize is a symbol of what is going on. People need to listen to the affections, words from emotions, because poetry directly tries to illustrate those feelings. In that sense, part of the cultural policies of the books took into account that manifestation of poetry in the country. And that is how there was a festival that was created where more than 150 poets gathered in one scenario in the Teresa Carreño Auditorium. Then they traveled all throughout the country. This is still done. Last year, it was not done because of the pandemic. Nevertheless, several poetry encounters were carried out online. If I talk again about the publishing house, El Perro y la Rana, I can say that I dedicated myself to promote poetry amongst youngsters along with the team with which I work. And we performed the first national encounter of young poets. Youngsters of all the countries participated in that meeting. We made research of who were writing poetry in the country by then. People who were between 20 to 30 years of age, approximately. And we brought them all to Caracas. We made a meeting, we held workshops, seminars, we heard them. And evidently, we also tried to look for those of them who were writing poetry based on their collective experiences. Maybe magazines, maybe literary collectives. Well, we found them with a lot of experience, mainly out of Caracas, in other cities of the country. That meeting meant for many of those poets the fact that they were able to publish their poems and they had links with other poets. And this is something we feel proud about. This year, we did the second meeting online. There's another video. This is a short one. There's another one that is a bit longer. And well, there are two more videos in order to close with the topic of El Perro and la Rana. And this has to do with the anniversary of that publishing company. I wanted to show you that this became a training space for people, for young people, from a publishing point of view, from a critical reading point of view, from the design point of view, and from the point of view of concepts and formats for books. Books are made not only on a printed modality, but also digitally on the brochures. We also publish children's books, interactive books. What you hear behind me are the guacamayas, the birds, the typical birds from Caracas. I don't know if you can hear them. They're right behind me. Well, so El Perro and la Rana Publishing House became a training space. That is why I want to show a short video where some of the people who dedicated their time to that publishing house talk about what the publishing house means to them. Then there's another video that talks about this meeting of young poets, which meant an important milestone throughout the construction of the production circuits and publication circuits of poetry, mainly among the youngsters of Venezuela. So if we can proceed to show the videos, please.
Familia, escuela.
The publishing house is a family, it's a school, it's learning, a right to painting, thinking, reasoning. It's a whole history, militancy, workshops, schools, learning, work, a lab of ideas. It's our America.
Ese era recortito, pero bueno, un poco esas son las
It
caras.
was a short video, but those are the faces of the people who are working in the publications or in the books published by Perro y la Rana. The second video is a summary of the meetings of the poets. If we can please show the video.
Ya lo vamos a ver el video. Estamos esperando un segundito, pero ya lo vamos a ver.
We're about to watch the video.
Ahí va.
En el marco del Festival Mundial de Poesía,
Within the
quisimos
framework
a
of
jóvenes
the
escritores, un
poetry
poco para
workshop,
saber,
we
primero
wanted
para
to
conocer
invite young
quiénes están
poets,
escribiendo en
first of
Venezuela,
all, to
sobre
see
todo para
who
potenciar
is
el
writing poetry in Venezuela and to promote this activity within our country.
Agria, en la noche tibia, cárcel mi cuerpo, volutas las ansias, desgano, este fruto
This is a poem recited by this poet.
Le dimos mucha prioridad a la gente que está trabajando en colectivos, en agrupaciones, bueno, participar en 21 colectivos literarios de 18 estados del país, un total de 76 poetas. Digamos que el encuentro ha abarcado tanto la exposición de experiencias que los mismos jóvenes poetas hacen para nosotros, como el ofrecimiento de herramientas de formación, espacios de debate con poetas consagrados, poetas internacionales también.
Of famous poets, international poets as well.
Se llama inverso narrativo. Cierro el ciclo como creo que es cerrar una puerta.
Close the
Cada paso es
cycle
una
like
decisión.
closing a
Estoy envuelto
door.
en
Every
tormenta.
step is a decision.
Bueno, la necesidad de incluir dentro de un encuentro breve como el primer Encuentro Nacional de Poetas Jóvenes las actividades de talleres es precisamente porque se trata de jóvenes, la gran parte de los invitados al encuentro que están iniciando la escritura. En cuanto a la escritura creativa, es muy válida la escritura creativa para jóvenes poetas, y ellos son poetas. Es un espacio para ofrecer a los poetas, en este caso, referentes de grandes escritores que han desarrollado trabajos y manuales para los escritores. Entonces es importante conocer esas referencias. Luego tenemos el taller de formación para escritura creativa en comunidades. ¿Por qué las comunidades? Porque son los espacios a los que
we do this in communities because these are the spaces where scholars practically never go.
Hoy más que nunca, la tecnología,
Today, more than ever,
digamos, la
technology
plataforma digital está allí a disposición.
and the digital platform is there.
Entonces, este taller promueve ese movimiento, esa posibilidad, porque es amplísima la posibilidad que ofrece.
There's a whole range of possibilities that is offered.
Un pergamino. Así, el tiempo sabrá del hombre y los charcos de los cometas no batidos.
Logramos llegar a este encuentro justamente por eso, por un levantamiento y una unificación en una base de datos de todos los muchachos y muchachas que están activísimos dentro de cada una de sus parroquias, estados, municipios, etcétera. Y nos pareció que era fundamental que no fuese solamente una expresión de la capital, que no fuese un encuentro de Caracas, sino que fuese un encuentro que convocara a la mayor cantidad de los estados, de Barquisimeto, de Barinas, vinieron compañeros de Amazonas, convocamos del estado Bolívar, y es muy significativo porque además están trabajando en formatos muy diversos. No solamente están trabajando la poesía desde la escritura más formal y más clásica, sino que también están trabajando formatos digitales. Abren blogs, trabajan redes sociales.
El perro y la rana
social media. El perro y la rana publishing house
a él, de verdad que ha sido un
has
trabajo
been dedicated to this meeting. It has been an excellent work, and we as a publishing house,
los jóvenes poetas,
we feel
escuchándolos,
happy
y además,
because we have heard all these
cómo mejorar
poets,
las
and
ediciones
also they are
para
learning
ellos, y
how
cómo también
to
de alguna manera apoyar las
improve their
ediciones
skills.
alternativas, las ediciones
And we
autogestivas,
are
¿no?
also
Y no
considering how to
únicamente, y
support
eso es
them.
importante, están participando
This is something
poetas,
important.
están
We are not only
participando aquí
having the
también
participation of
promotoras
poets,
del
we're
libro,
having the
están
participation of book
participando editores,
promoters.
están
We have the participation of
participando
editors,
diseñadores.
of
Entonces,
publishers,
esa
of
multiplicidad,
designers.
cantantes, por ejemplo,
So amongst that multiple
participantes de espacios de hip hop.
group of people,
Entonces,
we
esa
have
multiplicidad y
singers
esa
of hip
diversidad que
hop.
tenemos en este encuentro
there's a
ha permitido
wide
lo que justamente
variety,
veníamos planificando, que era justamente lo que
this
queríamos.
is what we
No era
had
otra
planned.
cosa que
This is
simplemente
exactly what we
articulación.
wanted. We
Nos
wanted
vamos
to have that
contentos,
networking.
queremos ahora, eso sí, salieron
We are
un
very
montón
happy.
de retos para próximos
Evidently, we have
encuentros,
many
de temas que
challenges
seguir
for future
desarrollando,
meetings,
nos quedamos
of
todos
topics that
conectados,
we have to
intercambiamos
develop.
contactos,
We are
redes
all
sociales, y bueno, ahora
interconnected.
lo
We
que queda es
exchange
ya ponerse fecha,
our information, our social media accounts, etc.
Bueno, ahí vimos una síntesis.
We were able to take a look of a synthesis, a summary of the first meeting of young poets. As I said, this was a milestone because it represented many other opportunities later on for these young poets that organize themselves in collectives, in groups, for the current creation and independent creation of groups. El Perro y la Rana has created many poems, books, but we must say that in Venezuela, as part of the sanctions, we have seen the need of creating alternative forms that are self-managed. And that has been positive because we were able to overcome the dependency on the state policies, even though that doesn't mean that we still need the public policies, of course, for promoting literature, and mainly among youngsters. That still exists. El Perro y la Rana presently publishes and prints books. The group is smaller, but we also give importance to digital editions. I believe that all the publishing houses around the world are having this effect of migrating to digital books. But here, due to the economic pressure and due to the difficulty to have access to the supplies, this has been an obligation for us to do. We have not stopped, we continue to publish. And if we go back again to the speech regarding my story, my life, while working for El Perro y la Rana, the Minister of Culture, Fidel Barbarito, who is a very important songwriter here in Venezuela, he asked me to work for the Minister of Culture. I accepted that position with the condition of not leaving El Perro y la Rana, because as I said before, to me, that publishing house was very important because I was there since its beginning. Therefore, I occupied both positions at the same time. I was the Vice Minister of Culture, and from that point of view, the greatest learning to me was to apply policies in the street. That is what President Maduro called it, policies in the street. And this was also convoked by President Chávez. This meant that we had to be in every day talking directly to people in the most remote communities. As a vice minister, I went to the Amazonas. I was in contact with indigenous people. I went to the Andes, to the coast. I traveled all throughout the country. They were very touching trips because on those trips, I had to hear directly from the people what their problems were. I'm talking about 2014 onwards. Then we had a Venezuela that was sieged with lots of problems, with many things to solve. So my experience as a vice minister had to do with the street policy, street government. Nevertheless, from the culture sector, I believe we made lots of achievements. On one hand, we had laws that were discussed. We started to have congresses, debates nationwide. They started to be done locally, but then they were done all throughout the country. And we collected all the observations and the different visions of the artists, the culture promoters, artisans of the country. And I participated in the third National Culture Meeting in 2014. I believe I showed an image of that Congress. It was a logo of the Congress, what I showed, actually. Maybe later on in the internet, we might find some of the activities that were held in the Congress, but I simply wanted to say that that work implied the organization and systematization of many observations and views of people from the parishes, from the states, and we took all that work through the rest of the country. So we took the thoughts of people from a local level regarding the design of cultural policies. We took all that, all the opinions of the artists and of the culture promoters, we took that nationwide. There is a term that is the culture promoters that is very important. It is a term that is very used, and in this sense, we don't just talk that the artisans are more important than the writers, more than a writer that has not won any prize. That is not what we look for. Because according to an anthropologic idea of culture, we do culture every day. So that ample conception of the culture promoter was debated a lot. As a result of this Congress tried to systematize then all those views and tried to put them all at the same level and to screen them through policies on this subject that is so complex. Nowadays, due to the attack to the currency and the economic war, the Patria system has a bonus for the culture promoters. It's an emergency policy, and I think it's significant the fact that the culture promoters have to be taken into account. They have to be taken into account also from a social security point of view, and that was an achievement of this entity. I don't know if we were able to look at the image, but another duty I had as a vice minister had to do with a Congress that was called Inventing Democracia of the 21st Century. Image one was the Congress logo, and the second image had to do with this other event that I'm mentioning. In this sense, we wanted to make a network of the intellectuals and artists. Okay, there we can see the image of the third National Culture Congress, where we tried to collect all the proposals from the local standpoint to a whole comprehensive document that contained policies. Then we have image number two, has to do with the other Congress that I mentioned, Inventing Democracy of the 21st Century. This was a very important Congress that gathered hundreds of intellectuals, international intellectuals that came to Venezuela in 2015. By then, Venezuela had already been declared a threat by the government of Obama. And the support of all these intellectuals was very important. There was a tribute to Eduardo Galeano, who just passed away. But the interesting thing of this Congress is that we tried to overcome that vision, that view that from the culture, we only convoked the artists and the culture promoters. No, we also wanted to invite scientists, social militants. So we had different workstations with artists, writers, scientists, not only social scientists, but also scientists of difficult sciences in order to break with that division. We also invited militants, social militants, in order to propose a solution to the different crises. This was a very interesting experience because we had people from the Venezuelan Andes who dedicate to cultivate potato. And we also invited scientists and intellectuals from Europe and Latin America and other parts of the world. They were all at the same workstations. So the result in the end was quite interesting, mainly the experience itself. Our idea also was to have like a Robinson type Congress, of course, following what Samuel Robinson promoted, which was to look for what belongs to us. So we heard diverse voices, diverse people, in order to generate tools to make our own democracy. We talked about what has to be done for human rights to solidify those concepts from the international diplomacy. We know, for example, that Venezuela is attacked with that type of legitimization of the human rights. Those concepts generally are the ones that attack democracy and the human rights. So in that sense, inventing democracy of the 21st century was quite enriching.
So going back to my life, I continued with El Perro y la Rana for a long time. I gave birth. I had 2 daughters. And then I just left the public activities a little bit removed in order to care for my daughters. After these experiences of public policies in the cultural area, and they were of the essence in my life. Let's remove that image, please. Let's remove the image of the Congress. Well, this one, before discussing this international encounter, well, I devoted my work to something else. I started to work on feminism, which is a world wave in Argentina, in Chile. Argentina is incredible. It is an exemplary country where feminists are organized, demanding their rights. And they have been very successful. They have set the example. And maternity just increased my militancy as a feminist. So I supported the organization of the first international encounter of writers in 2020, last year in October. It was a wonderful meeting with 70 women from Latin America. They met in different fora. It was a virtual meeting, but it was very warm, and many networks were created. In this encounter, we discussed music, there were collective readings, many activities. And then as a result, other experiences have appeared with collective of women writers, with Mexicans, Argentinian, Uruguayan, mainly Latin America, but also very migrants in the US, the Chicanos in the US. It's been an opening of new horizons and knowledge into poetry. The Chicano movement in the US is extremely important and interesting, and also the topic of migration. Therefore, in this encounter, we want to, well, it was so good that we're going to organize a second encounter in the Caracas municipality organized it, but this meeting was also possible because of the contribution of many writers in independent fashion, contributed to the success of this encounter. And there were many consequences from that encounter. And I think I have a clip. Images 3 and 4, there is another image on this encounter. There is a small clip that we can listen to if you want. After these images, there's a small video, something very short.
Bueno, como ahí como que venía el videito.
First International Encounter of Writers.
Los adioses. Quisimos aprender la despedida y rompimos la alianza que juntaba al amigo con la amiga y alzamos la distancia entre las amistades divididas para aprender a irnos. Caminamos, fuimos dejando atrás las colinas, los verdaderamente valles. Miramos su hermosura.
We astonished at their beauty, but we didn't stay there. This is something very simple, just a capsule
Good grammar and spelling
around this
you want to write
encounter.
essays that inspire.
So I just wanted to show this because we loved the idea of seeing contemporary writers. Indira Isel Torres Cruz from Mexico. They read poets already dead that has been invisibilized by the canon and the systematization of the circuits of that legitimize literature. And we're working a lot on this, especially women writers, to exclude the literary canon based on the model of white male. Well, there's some homosexuals in the periphery, but women, we are not studied. I studied literature, Spano-American literature, and only 5% of the program was formed of women writers, and in primary and secondary schools, few women are read by students. Therefore, we are creating a movement to rescue, to promote through the media networks and so on, to promote women writers. And I was very successful during this encounter to write the history of literature, visibilizing these women writers and who are not part of the canon. That, of course, requires time. But ourselves, we are today, for instance, we are reading more contemporary women writers. Therefore, this encounter will take place this year. Again, we are already warming up and organizing the preliminary meetings. So I'm working on a transmedia experience to broadcast poetry from home, in order to investigate the voices writing poetry in Venezuela and in Latin America. Latin American women poets. So that's the two objectives. And based on the reading of poems by these poets, I publish in the social networks, in YouTube, and they have become a repository of the voices, because you can listen to the poets. And I also have also researched those dead poets. All that is in Instagram. It can be shared in social networks, in Instagram, and that was boosted during this pandemic in order to disseminate this information. At the beginning, I thought it was thought for Telegram and WhatsApp, but now it is broadcast in the YouTube and other social networks. And it is a success because people like it. And in Venezuela and Latin America, people are disseminating those clips. Of course, it has not to be exclusive for these private networks. We can also use other means. But it's been a success to do it ourselves. And it has given rise to a network of women poets, Latin American poets. We've been even more closer together with other women poets in the past, and of today. I have a link there with a video, and there you have a reproduction list of those publications. We can leave the link there so you can listen to them. And there we have several poets, women poets. It is, but then you can have it if you want to listen to them later on. Now let's move forward to image 5. There, well, this was done the day before yesterday on March the 8th, International Women's Day, as a result of this encounter of writers after the work with home poetry, etc., which is also disseminated in a transgender and feminist channel in Brazil. The ella movement, they also convey this Latin American poetry. Based on those experiences, well, we have networked with other women writers, and on March the 8th, we read the poems in various pages that have joined this network of women writers. We had 13 poets reading our poems, but also poems of other invisibilized women poets. It was wonderful because we shared our voices, our readings of those poets. So we are promoting some clips of those readings on Monday. It was wonderful, wonderful experience. And it's just the most recent activity I've been involved in. Well, this is my testimony in my participation in the cultural field, in the publication of books. I know it was brief, but I hope that this relation about my work has been interesting for you. Thank you very much for your presentation through your life history. There we find a lot of elements on the culture in revolution. I understand that we have several questions. Maria Teresa, for instance, says that this should be disseminated and broadcast in public TV. Question: how culture is developing in the country? I'm a cartoonist. I have Omar Cruz, a great cartoonist. He's trying to publish a cartoonist book on the Battle of Carabobo. A comment: we need to internationalize our cultural policy to break the chains of slavery and ignorance. Chavez was a great reader and promoted reading as a cultural fact. In Winnipeg, they're organizing a seminar on Venezuela, and they're going to use this video. They refer to the video of Chavez promoting reading. In the book fair in 2019, 2019, we worked with China, and here in Venezuela, we were able to read Chinese literature, which is part of the democratization of reading and democratization of books. So those are some of the comments. I do not know if you have other questions. Jadek could have other questions.
A ver. Vamos a ver si por allá.
Jadek, are you hearing? Do you have questions?
Yeah, I don't have any question. Yeah.
Bueno, entonces, Giordana, te invitamos a responder.
Very well. Giordana, if you can make a comment on some of the ideas expressed by the people through the chat. Well, those were just general comments. Chavez was indeed a driving force for reading. And something is happening. And they're erasing the Chavez's interventions. So we need to rescue that material. We need to disseminate. We need to do a curator work on Chavez's words and videos and the promotion of culture and reading. So we need to do that to protect that material because they are erasing those materials. Regarding book fair, well, they continue. China was a special guest in 2019 and in-person fair, wonderful. 2020 was Mexico, it was a virtual fair. And this year, Vietnam will be the guest country. But we have a historical challenge in cultural policies in Venezuela regarding internationalization of our artists and writers. I think Cuba is far ahead of us. They are far more audacious. They have been able to position their culture abroad. We have made efforts, Venezuelans participate in foreign book fairs. And now we have a good relations with the Fondo de Cultura Económica, led by an organic intellectual, Ignacio Taibo II. There was interaction with them. So the Venezuelan Ministry of Culture, they are disseminating Venezuelan books in Mexico. So that's a good thing to foster internationalization. But that's a challenge because Venezuela has been attacked in so many fashions that to raise our voices, to show what we are doing here, and from the spiritual perspective, well, it's good because that's going to show another face of Venezuela. So it is strategic to redouble those efforts. Regarding Omar Cruz, I admire him a lot. I was in the Vice Ministry of Culture. We exhibited his work. He is very prolix. He does a lot. I admire him enormously. And I think it is urgent that during the bicentennial celebration, and we are reproducing the images of Carabobo, he should be part and parcel of that effort. And I think that it is being done. But I agree with you regarding the importance of this cartoonist. Regarding women poets and this audio, well, I think we could go beyond the social networks, and this should be done also through TV. We discussed this with ALBA in ALBA TV.
Son desafíos, son retos de experiencias que todavía son.
These are new challenges, of course. As I said before, we had connected with people around the region. And together, we've been able to transcend and overcome many barriers, and we're able to grow together. So, March the 8th was the result of this joint work in the region. So we need to do it not only in Venezuela, but in the region as a whole, from these various struggle niche, like in the women literature, women poetry, and so on. Thank you very much for your kind participation. We could speak about this for a long time. They were commenting in Indonesia. They want to extend cooperation. But if I want to organize a book fair in Indonesia, can we work together? So, Giovanna, you can enter the chat and then follow these comments. Out of these seminars, we have had very good networking. So we are the same people in various regions. This is part of the dream of Chavez, and we are building step by step by networking with so many people. Given the possibility given by Giovanna, I would like to read a song of Alfredo Citarrosa from Uruguay. And I dare to read this because today we're celebrating an anniversary of this singer, and it is related to the next guest, Sandino Primera. It is an expression of the historic current of musicians. And because it is related to the experience in Venezuela. In my country, we are hard. My people sing a song of peace. My people is on the alert. No one will silence their voice. We are hard in our country. In my country, at dawn, we say we can read in the hand of the workers, and no king can impose their will. In our country, we see at dawn our struggle. So I wanted to share these words by Citarrosa, and then I invite Sandino to join us to share his thoughts. He is a popular singer, a folk singer accompanying the revolution from the start, from his Bolivarian roots, and more recently, recreating, counting what he feels, and also expressing what he's living in the people's roots. He lives in small communities. He is a singer, a troubadour that can sing on any place where his voice is required. So, Sandino, if you are ready, please begin your presentation in the seminar. Thank you very much. Hello, Pablo, Giordana, Juno, Jade. Thank you. And people listening and watching us, thank you for your support. Thank you for making this contact possible. It was so wonderful that you read Citarrosa, Pablo. It reminded me the Nobel Prize when Bob Dylan won the literature prize. Many people criticized him until they started to read and listen to his songs, the Bob Dylan songs. It reminded me, Citarrosa, the same thing. So much poetry in those territories. We have wonderful poetry in Palestine, in the north of Africa, in Asia. Again, thank you very much for this possibility. Tell me if you are hearing well or if something is wrong so we can make improvements as we move along. Well, this is a great topic. we are going to reflect, to talk, to throw some stones and collect some stones, to talk about decolonization. It has to do with independence, sovereignty. It has to do with indigeneity, endogenous development in the territories, in the countries, to talk about culture. As Giordana said, it has been an important process, a long, protracted process to be able to give importance to the work of pop artists, those who have a cause to produce the arts coming from the roots and the reality of the people. And then they are called cultores, artists different from the art of those who consider themselves superior. If we want to transcend the behavior that no one considers superior to others, if we are modest, we need to understand the success we have had and going towards the pop artist, those strongly connected with his or her roots as an artist. And I want to elaborate on this later on, based on our reflections. What we are saying is not against someone in particular, is against all of us, because we are a society that comes from the only system that has remained solid, namely capitalism. We come from capitalism, and we are part of that tragedy and that reality. And it is based on this that we're going to elaborate my ideas to try to emancipate and a constant effort to overcome colonial ties in the way we conceive and we see the world. Jade, could you help me with the coming song? There is a song which is venting and going ahead, moving forward. And in this song, we refer to several ideas. When we have polarization because of the political struggle, in this struggle where we have those opposed to capitalism, the revolutionary process against the established model, namely capitalism. So we have this polarization in society of those in favor and against capitalism. So what we aspire is for prosperity for everybody, not who are in favor or against the revolution. We want prosperity for society as a whole, emancipation and decolonization for society as a whole. We want the well-being for people as humanity as a whole. So in this song, I start by saying that I sing to my people, meaning I sing to the whole people to those who are in favor or those who are against the revolution. Because at the end of the day, people around the world, we aspire to a better life. We aspire to learn. We aspire to education. We want to have a home, a roof on our heads. So that is, architecture is important. We want to feed. We want to feed our body. We want to heal our bodies. And it has to do with the food. So
it seems like we are talking about the same thing, about something logical. But it's not easy to understand. It seems that it's not easy to understand what cultural revolutions mean nowadays in Venezuela from a Bolivarian standpoint, from a Robinson type standpoint, from a Latin American standpoint. But in the end, it connects us with all the people all over the world. We all want to learn. We all want to feed ourselves and to feed ourselves well. We all wish to live in a place that protects us from the environment, etc., as well as our children. We all want to heal. We all want to have a good health. These are basic elements of human beings. And if we continue reflecting on these topics and discussing and making policies and confronting the historical enemies, then those little details will start to fall behind, and we are not going to solve them. And then we are going to continue with the same tragedy. So this song that is called Venting and Forward aims at manifesting that anger that we might feel. It is a reality that reflects the reality of the world, of the mankind. And we cannot stick to that feeling. We must vent and we must move forward. We must make progress. That is the meaning of the song, and that is what we must do. We must vent, we must criticize, we must build, and we must move forward. Next, Jade, I would like to ask you to please play the first song that is called Venting and Forward, which deals with the topic that I mentioned before.
Ahí viene. Ahí viene, Sandro.
Ok, esa no es la canción.
That is not the song.
Desahogo y pa'lante.
It's called Venting and Forward. Desahogo y pa'lante. This was launched 3 years ago. That's the one.
Cuando yo le canto al pueblo, es decir a toda la gente. Cuando yo le canto al pueblo, es decir a toda la gente. La que pueda estar de acuerdo y la que sea disidente. La que pueda estar de acuerdo y la que sea disidente. Todos queremos cambiar de lo malo para lo bueno. Todos queremos cambiar de lo malo para lo bueno. Y podamos transformar en abono este mierdero. Y se pueda transformar en abono este mierdero juntos, juntos, juntos. No te pongas pongas a soñar que cambiando los gobiernos, no te pongas a soñar que cambiando los gobiernos, rapidito va a cambiar los problemas que tenemos, rapidito va a cambiar los problemas que tenemos. Debemos aprovechar para que nos organicemos, debemos aprovechar para que nos organicemos y podamos encauzar la energía del pensamiento y se pueda impulsar la energía que tenemos juntos, juntos, juntos. Tuvimos bastante tiempo solo viendo al extranjero, tuvimos bastante tiempo solo viendo al extranjero. Por eso es una sorpresa conocernos desde adentro, por eso es una sorpresa conocernos desde adentro. Por ahí hay que seguir para que nazca lo nuevo, por ahí hay que seguir para que nazca lo nuevo y ser más original, no un refrito de lo ajeno, y ser más original, no un refrito de lo ajeno. Juntos, juntos, juntos. La cultura oportunista en los partidos del pueblo, la cultura oportunista en los partidos del pueblo. Antes eran copellanos y también eran adecos y hoy se van para el PSUV y seguimos este cuento. No cambia la policía ni tampoco el panadero, no cambia la policía ni tampoco el panadero. Ambos pueden ser ladrones y también ser matraqueros, ambos pueden ser matones de la alegría de un pueblo. Ya ves cómo es de complejo recoger este vainero, ya ves cómo es de complejo recoger este vainero. No vayamos a dudar, esto lo resolveremos. Aquí hay que acelerar la revolución que queremos juntos, 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 juntos.
Bueno, eso fue de Desahogo y Pa'lante. Muchas gracias, Adi.
That was a song, Venting and Forward. Thank you very much, Jade. This song is part of the same life project that has to do with decolonization, the life project for strengthening our sovereignty. It includes the reflections that guide us towards that goal. It is a critical song. It criticizes some internal processes that actually have to do with mankind, who we are, and our process. Because this is very important, what I'm going to say. In Venezuela, we are clear on the fact that the revolution is the perfect model to save ourselves as humanity. It is a model that will enable us to develop our own Venezuelan manner in favor of life that will later consolidate our own model adapted to our awareness. Even though we are clear on the fact that the revolution that will allow all these reflection thoughts, we are still a society. We have learned from others, from other models, from other habits, other customs. And in order to change habits, it is not something simple. It is not done by saying long life read to the revolution or by changing the names of the institutions or by raising a speech against the imperialist governments, the warrior administrations. And I believe that the society is more aware of them and they are opposed to those administrations, but that is not enough. One song is not enough either. As the song that you heard right now said, even though we think one way or another, we all want the same thing. We all want to feed ourselves correctly. We want to live in a dignified place within normal environmental conditions. We want to heal ourselves in an appropriate manner. This also has to do with feeding. The health system has to be a dignified system. We desire a proper education that pertains to the country where we live. And at the same time, this has to be connected with the rest of the world. And this is what we all want along the world. Even if we believe or not in a revolution, even if we believe or not in a cultural revolution, even if we believe on the cultural transformation processes or not. So that song that you heard talks about that. And we have to do this together. Unity is vital, is crucial. Unity doesn't mean that we must all think the same way, we must all look the same way, we must all talk and eat the same way. No, unity has to do with being able to make decisions in a jointly manner, in a specific manner, on those basic topics that I mentioned, which are feeding, household or dwellings, education, and health. I promise I will write the lyrics of these songs later on so that you can have the lyrics available, because there are some sentences that are quite colloquial, like the word matraqueo. Matraqueo means it's a word that refers to situations when the police officers don't punish you for a failure that you committed, a fault that you committed. Maybe you crossed a red light or something like that, and the police officer doesn't apply a fine to you. Policemen, instead of sanctioning you, they ask you for money and they let you go. So that is matraqueo. It's an attitude where policemen might fail. Maybe you don't have some legal documents, so the police officers take advantage of that opportunity that you don't have the documents of the vehicle in order to do that term, matraqueo. I promise I will send the lyrics of this song. Now, decolonization. We have lived a revolutionary process for 21 years now. 21 to almost 22 years we have lived in this revolution. We have been experiencing a very important process, the most significant process of a whole century. And in my opinion, evidently, I consider that this has been the most important process from a social point of view, from the point of view of the agglomeration of the whole Venezuelan population, of all the sectors of the Venezuelan population. We have experienced the most important process along our history. And I repeat myself, in this century. And throughout these 22 years, we have been able to shake the tree, so as to say it. We've been able to awaken, for good or for bad, we have been able to awaken a society that was very much dispersed, distracted in culture, in the traditional culture of the capitalism, which is in charge of entertaining you for you not to take into account the medular problems of the society, to entertain you for you not to think about the solution to those problems. They just want you to think about shallow solutions. That shallowness is part of the symbols of capitalism. They're very, very shallow, very superficial. They have problems with the ego, important problems with the ego. They believe that they know everything, that everything is already done. That's something typical of capitalism. So they try to entertain us for us not to understand the root causes of the problems of the societies. The problems that we have nowadays due to the pandemic, for example. One of the main problems of this system that is not good at all, and we know that, and due to the pandemic, many people have gotten ill and they had to go to the healthcare centers to be assisted. And no nation was ready to receive their people. In fact, many countries, what they did was to build special spaces, alternate spaces, to be able to receive and assist ill people, people who were sick with the virus. And in the end, they might have different diseases, but they were sick and they had to solve that problem. But there were no countries that showed that they were able to assist their people. And that is a symbol of capitalism. They say they are the best ones of the world, that they have the solutions to all the problems, that they represent development, but they cannot even heal their people. They cannot even cure their citizens. They were not able to do so. In fact, we are still suffering the consequences of that problem. Therefore, talking about decolonization, while in this society, would seem as something retrograde. It's like talking about the past. It's like talking about the independence struggles. The problem is that in Venezuela, our condition is practically post-colonialism. The revolutionary process of this 22 years has allowed us to make progress in many
proceso revolucionario vive una mayor independencia política, vive una mayor independencia en la conciencia de su sociedad y en la posibilidad de la reflexión de su sociedad debido a esta independencia, repito, política, sobre todo política, ya que culturalmente, materialmente hablando, estamos muy debiluchos, es una de nuestras grandes debilidades. No podemos cambiar subjetivamente si no hay a la par un cambio material. Es decir, si nosotros estamos en una guerra, estamos sancionados, repito, por los enemigos históricos, y nosotros le estamos diciendo a los enemigos históricos,
and we are telling those enemies that they can go very far away because we don't want them near, but we still depend on them to transform oil into fuel. If we still depend on them for many other things, then in the end, we are not really fighting. We are not actually fighting with our tools to gain our independence. We are not reaching those goals that are proper of the independence. I repeat, yes, we depend on our historical enemies to solve our problems. Venezuela has the capacity to solve all our problems. Nevertheless, we need to focus on the endogenous processes in order to achieve its independence. We must focus on how to distribute, to build, and even to change patents. The inverse engineering, for example, to be able to build all the materials that were built by our enemies. We must tell our enemies that we don't want to have any relationship with them. So we must make progress on this sense, on this matter. I repeat, we're talking about decolonization. That is an unavoidable synonym of independence. It is an unavoidable synonym of transformation, of sovereignty. And when from a material point of view, all the things that we use, those little items that we use, from a pair of pants, a deodorant, the food you eat, the kitchen supplies, a refrigerator. I mean, I'm talking about items that we use every day in this planet. Most of the human beings in this planet, if all these materials or supplies are still manufactured abroad, and they're not manufactured by us, then that is a symbol of weakness. It is a symbol of dependence, not the other way around. It's not a symbol of independence. We are not independent from a materialistic point of view. We are not sovereign from a materialistic point of view. Our independence resides on the Venezuela revolutionary case. It resides on our political independence, on our political awareness. It lies on our political work, on our political struggle for political power, where the hegemony is in the hands of capitalism. This is why when we talk about culture, we don't only like to talk about arts, about books, music, painting, dancing, etc., movie theaters. When we talk about culture, it is crucial, it's extremely vital and crucial for us to be able to emphasize that we talk about the way of living of a human being, of the human being's attempt to live better. We are not talking about the artistic expressions that are the expressions of the culture of every country or every nation. Arts are a very important expression of every country, of the culture of a nation. Nevertheless, it is not the culture of a country. The music, the way of singing, the way of painting, the way of talking, the way of writing, the way of capturing an image, that is not the total culture of a country. The country can express itself by many different ways from a cultural point of view. Corruption is also a cultural symbol of a country, of a society. A corrupted society is a society that has a culture with failures. It is a country that has a culture in a bad shape, because culture tries or intends to organize society for its well-being. Culture is expressed at all times. There is not just one sole cultural fact, no, because culture never stops. Culture is always communicating something. It can be something good, something bad. It reflects something about us. Culture always expresses itself. It's a process. Culture always communicates itself. So for us, when we talk about culture, it is very important to clarify that arts are an expression of culture. That certainly they are going through a struggle because the fine arts kidnapped the concept of culture. So people with culture were the ones that knew about fine arts, and not people who knew how to plant a seed or harvest, or to people who know about weather, etc. So culture, people with culture were categorized as persons who knew mainly about arts, fine arts. By the way, we can include literature in the fine arts. When I talk about fine arts, I'm not talking just about the Louvre Museum. I am also talking about literature. Not only about novels or poetry, I'm talking about philosophy, sociology, anthropology, about all these topics. So there is a struggle in order to position subjects, authors that are reflecting on this in order to achieve independence in their countries. Venezuela has a lot to say about that. Venezuela has had great thinkers who, in an attempt to awaken the society, for people to understand the independentist fight has not been reached yet. And I believe we will never reach it. But I do believe that we will try to reach at least some levels of independence, certain levels of sovereignty from a material point of view. That at the same time is a product of a subjective matter. And that is a cycle. It's a closed cycle. It's a life process where we allow, we prohibit, because that is what culture is about allowing things, prohibiting things. That has to do with the habits of people. So all those things that I mentioned have to do with culture. So if we understand that it's important to emphasize arts as a process of expression of a culture, and the culture as a transversal process in a society, in any nation, in any country of the world, regardless of the country, if we understand that, then we have to say that if there are fine arts, there must be ugly arts. And next, I would like to ask Jade to show us the video that is called The Ugly Arts, which is the opposite of fine arts. So Jade, you can play this song. This song about the ugly arts is a calypso rhythm. It's something traditional of the eastern part of our country. In this song, we ask ourselves, if there are fine arts, then what are the ugly arts? Maybe it can be the person who drew a weapon. It can be a person who fires a weapon. So what are the ugly arts? If the fine arts are some specific ones, if we can define them, if there are some fine arts, then we have to wonder, what are the ugly arts? This is what the song is about. It's a song that is called Ugly Arts. Okay. We are now going to show the video right from Venezuela. Since we are looking for independence, then we're going to show this from Venezuela.
No tiene sonido. ¿Sí? escucha, ¿verdad? Vamos a ver, estamos aquí resolviendo problemas de dependencia.
I think that would be better if you can share it, please.
A ver si logramos que vean y escuchen la canción Las Feas Artes.
Sandino, ahí tanto te comento que han llegado unos cuantos saludos, felicitaciones.
There are many
Escribe
people greeting you from various parts of the country. Excellent space, very necessary for us to share. There is a question that we're going to share with you at the end on a song named Slaves. And regarding the new slavery, the question is, do we remain slaves? I do not know if you want to answer them now or after the song. Thank you. I heard your question. Yes, Slaves of Slaves is a very pertinent song. Was written in the 70s. And Ali says that we are slaves of slaves. And this new slavery is more hurtful because in the past, slaves tried to be free based on their own cosmogony, based on their own history. But today, in this new slavery of capitalism that is been there for 300 years as a social, cultural model, economic, political, educational, food model, and so on. Well, here you rely on a knowledge and in selling your knowledge, your body in exchange for money. So this is the network of this new type of slavery in a new fabric. So we want the freedom that our slave owners can give us, those who have accumulated the money and the wealth produced by society or produced by a country and administered by the government. Ali said in the 70s, this slavery is far more painful than the previous one, because to see the oppressed defending the oppressor, to see the historical offended defend those who have been offending them for centuries, where the machista and patriarchal position, their belief of being superior. So slave of slaves remain a very pertinent song today. And it's very good that you mentioned that song, because there are many details there. He says he asked a very complex question to intellectuals in the song. And he says, how come there are neighborhoods where the haves live, the rich, the wealthy, and the medium and high class? How come those neighborhoods have a nice names. Those hills have nice names, but those hills where the poor gathered, they receive an ugly name. So where the rich, where the rich live, they call it summits. And where the poor live, even though they live in higher mountains, they call it just hills, poor hills. So there is a way to differentiate the two areas, the wealthy and the poor ones. It is a way to differentiate and to insult the poor. This is a cultural language of superiority in those tiny details. In this confrontation with a historical enemy, sometimes we forget to reflect on the cultural domination, historical domination, and we continue reproducing the language of the oppressor. In the case of Venezuela, we have been reflecting a lot on how to change this language. In our independence process, we have tried to change language in the aesthetic, in the subjective way to approach reality. So Ali Primera wrote that song 30 years or 20 years before the Bolivarian Revolution. So, of course, Ali didn't live during the revolution, so he wrote this magnificent song. Because culture is always evolving. There are new ways to enslave people. If your economy changes, there will be new ways to enslave people, new type of slavery, economic labor slavery. And domination is a never-ending process. And Bolivar stressed that we have been dominated more by fear than by weapons. We've been dominated by knowledge. We have been dominated more by that type of by knowledge than by force. So ignorance is a tool used by the oppressors to oppress us further. The cellular phones is another tool of domination. It's tried to capture your knowledge, to use your ignorance, to use your anguish to live, eat, etc. So they continue dominating through these new tools. It is a never-ending process. So there are new slaves, slaves of slaves. That's for sure. The forms might change, processes might evolve, but the domination process as such goes on wherever we are, either in China, Paraguay, Uruguay, the US, Spain, France. The human process is alike. We have a stomach, we have a brain, we have eyes. We are human beings. The situation is the same. Beyond some cultural realities, differences between countries. Now, I would like to end with this idea. Why we want to stress arts as an expression of culture and not culture as the only way to understand all the arts. It's not so. We need to have a debate, long live debate, long live the facts, long live reality. So we're going to show the video. The ugly arts in contrast to the fine arts.
La impaciencia ganando terreno, convocando a la angustia y al miedo, preocupados por lo que no hemos visto, aterrados por lo que sí vemos. Y la calma se posa a un lado, ideas con las manos, aspirando más sonrisas junto al llanto, pues no hay que negar en dónde nos hemos metido en esta tragedia, esta cultura. De esta cultura, de su educación, su salud, su alimento, de sus artes, de sus bellas artes, tan excluyentes con las feas artes. ¿Cuáles serán? ¿Quiénes darán? ¿Dónde estarán las feas artes? Si existen bellas, debe haber feas. ¿Cuáles serán las feas artes? ¿Quiénes la harán? ¿Dónde estarán? Será la del dibujante del arma y la bala, o del emprendedor que tiene la financia y la fabrica, del comerciante que la revende, o del que la compra y la dispara. ¿Cuáles serán? ¿Quiénes la harán? ¿Dónde estarán las feas artes? Si existen bellas, debe haber feas. ¿Cuáles serán las feas artes? ¿Quiénes la harán? ¿Dónde estarán las feas artes? Las feas artes. La creatividad solo al servicio de la mercancía, la canción y el cine alienante, los sugestivos y atractivos comerciales para engañar a la infancia. Las grandes vallas publicitarias son bellas artes o feas artes. Por eso es que yo no soy ni bonito ni feo, y a ese mercenario de la belleza le digo que con mi arte tengo, que con mi arte tengo, que con mi arte tengo, que con mi arte tengo yo, y yo con mi arte tengo, con mi arte tengo yo, con mi arte tengo yo, con mi arte tengo yo, con mi arte tengo, con mi arte tengo. ¡Upa!
Bueno, las feas artes, con mi arte tengo. Hay una expresión en Venezuela en que
So the ugly arts. There is an expression in Venezuela. The masses, when the erudites, the sages of culture used to talk about the nice arts, the fine arts, and then a pop artist playing the cuatro or maracas, or a worker where he hears those complicated words, difficult to grasp. A way to reply them is to say, with my art, I have enough. What we mean is that what with our knowledge, with our traditional knowledge, is enough, and we are not overwhelmed by the erudite culture. In Venezuela, many people have contributed to this term. The erudite culture has to do with the behavior, a way to see the world and the way to behave as a superior being, recognized by those who have accumulated knowledge, those who have flooded institutions and the academy, those who have received degrees, and they consider themselves as the erudite. And since they have received those degrees and those prizes and rewards, they consider they are better. They are more cultivated. They are capable to survive in this world. They consider, therefore, superior because what humanity has created over the last 200 years is marked by this way to approach the world based on capitalism, affecting the economy, society, agriculture, the way you build your homes, and so on and so forth. So that's the topic of this ugly arts song. So we want to reflect upon this. If we have fine arts, then we also have ugly arts? No. Who are responsible for the ugly arts? If you are responsible for the fine arts, so what happened to the rest of the artists? And it's this reflection, the purpose is to reveal the contradiction of this system, where they continue to defend and legitimize that we have a superior humanity, we have a middle humanity, and a lower humanity. And this run counter to a way of life where we think that all human beings are important, no one is superior. And it doesn't matter if you come from other countries, no matter if the skin color is different, or they speak a different language. All human beings are important. No one is superior. All lives are important. No one is superior or better. So they say that when you think like that, it's because you are left-winger, because you are a revolutionary. No, no. This is part of our millenary wisdom. all human beings are important. All human beings are important. And it is a priority to us to think this way. So with this song, we want to stress that one of the main contradictions of the capitalist system, of the hegemonic system, is that they consider themselves as superior. So they think they have the right to kill, to throw bombs, to sanction others. So it becomes like natural. And humanity considers it natural that the United States sanction others, that the UK prohibits something, that the Spain condemns, and so on and so forth. It becomes natural because that is part of this system, which is in contradiction with life and human life. Human beings live. Human beings live. So to live, you need to have a support media, a support context. You need family, you need friends, you need society, you need the world as a whole to live. Humanity today, because of the pandemic, demonstrated how interdependent we are in this world. Those countries where medicine is much more evolved, those who have been able to study our bodies, our blood, from a scientific point of view, this pandemic has demonstrated how these countries, those countries who have made progress in education, Cuba is a great power because they have given priority to education and to the people. So they have also made great strides in healthcare. They are not perfect. And they have major strength in education and health. So that leads us to think about dependence and independence. If you cannot heal your body, so you have to rely on those who produce the medicine you require. But if that medicine is not manufactured in your country, your dependence and reliance on those countries that produce that medicine is higher. So this is vital in this conversation. We need to reduce the dependence over that knowledge. Decolonization. When we talk about culture, it's a spiral that go upwards and downwards, in the sense that, and we already discussed this, decolonization is synonymous with dependence, with independence. And colonization is synonymous with dependence. Therefore, in Venezuela, we are in a period of post-colonization because we are still very much reliant on other process abroad. We rely on their educational processes, on their health development, technology development, etc. And we do very little in relation to our level of consumption. We are doing very little in comparison with what we know regarding globalization, about the processes in other countries, what other peoples around the world are doing. So that is why I'm not against demagoguery when we talk about independence or sovereignty. However, I'm part of a current that like to clarify these details, these elements, and stressing that the first revolution and the search for independence, that search should start with yourself as individual, as community. So to be able to see this as a collective endeavor. But we need to start with our independence and sovereignty as individual, and then as a society. For instance, myself, I try to be very austere more and more, because in that fashion, I rely less on those who manufacture my clothing or other things that I need. I try to consume less and then protect my what I have. I want, of course, my clothing clean. So I need to learn how to clean my clothing, how to wash my clothing, and to preserve it in order to rely less on others. So when we talk about independence and decolonization, I don't think it is a removed topic. It has to be it has to do with with the individual, with the person. The person should go through a process of independence and sovereignty, because motherland, namely capitalism, because capitalism continued to teach us, to feed us, to clothe us. Well, it has contradictions. We have contradictions, of course. We don't want to kill anyone. I think we have had enough wars in our history. But the problem remains the same. Millions are dying of hunger. Millions of children die because of poor quality of water. We still have inequality, social inequality, which is huge, and so on and so forth.
So those are symbols of the fact that capitalism is not good. It never solved any problem. So talking about decolonization, independence, and sovereignty has to do with the individuality of every person. Since we are less independent, we must try to understand also our levels of independence compared to other people like us, men, women, who were able to learn something. They achieved it, and they were able to build computers, TV sets, cell phones, shoes, etc. And then we go ahead and we buy all those items from them. So our institutions, our ministries that are dedicated to culture, or that are called that way, ministries of culture, in most of the countries of the world, the institutions that are named culture, or that have the term culture in their official names, are institutions that are dedicated exclusively to artistic expressions. And you realize that about that very quickly. You realize that the ministries of cultures and the culture institutions are dedicated to attending the realities and the processes that have to do with art, that are related to literature, to cinema, to music, to dancing, etc., etc. So that's a failure. We consider that even though it is true that our arts are part of a culture, it is also true the culture is much more than arts. It includes more than the artistic expressions. So we must express a social symbol. We must inform the world that we're correcting that, and that we are starting to dare to extend the work range of a Ministry of Culture that doesn't only talk about arts. We want a Ministry of Culture that can propose, depending on their territories and on their nations, that can propose the ideal type of dwellings, of household for the human being, according to their environments. Also, the materials have to be used, the ideal materials have to be used for the housings, and so on and so forth. The same thing has to be done with medicines, with medications, all sorts of medications. The Western medicine can be applied, for example, also the homeopathy, the medicine that comes directly from nature. So we must accumulate all that knowledge so mankind is able to have that knowledge available, so that everyone can have that way of healing themselves available. Those are symbols of development, of independence, of decolonization. That can be a sign of the fact that we are expanding ourselves and that we are headed the right path in order to achieve sovereignty, independence, and endogenous development. So the Ministry of Cultures must also talk about the type of feeding according to the products that they have. They have to strengthen the need to produce more proteins, carbohydrates in order to improve their health. The ministries of cultures have also the need to talk about this and to be linked with other institutions that are dedicated specifically to feeding. They have to be linked to other institutions that are specifically dedicated to housings. So the Ministry of Cultures have to be part of the debates of the education, of the decolonizing education. They have to be related to the new educational curriculum from the elementary education to higher education. The Ministry of Cultures have to be linked to those entities, because if they are called Ministry of Cultures, and by the way, we're talking about the case of Bolivia, for example, the experience in Bolivia, they have a ministry where the cultures, the ministry has a secretariat, an institution, or an adscribed agency that is called Ministry for the Decolonization. That is an excellent symbol. We consider that that is something that in our countries in Latin America should be applied. That should be applied in the America that has been stricken, that has been filled with terrorism, with wars. That should be applied here. In Latin America and in Venezuela, we must take that step. The Ministry of Culture in Venezuela is only dedicated to the artistic expressions. And that, what I'm saying does not go against any specific minister. I'm not talking against the president or the cabinet or the higher authorities of the country. No. We are just going against ourselves. We are in a setback. I mean, we are delayed. We, as a territory and as a nation, we are in a setback. We cannot compare ourselves to other countries. It's not fair. because that is typical of capitalism. But we sometimes must compare ourselves to establish goals in order to see where we should go, what we can achieve. However, we cannot compare ourselves to the development process of other nations because every country is different. So we must take steps towards that, to recognizing ourselves, to recognizing our failures. We cannot evade them. We cannot say, oh, well, we have this knowledge and we found this with this data and with, no. Culture, since it is a process, it is in a constant development. So whenever you think you know everything, then a new reality comes about. And that new reality becomes a new habit, a new costume, and then the culture changes, and then the whole scenario changes. So what we cannot lose track of is that the fact that the endogenous development will always be the most sincere development. Our production scope for our sovereignty will always be our most sincere scope, because either if we like it or not, that scope will tell us what situation we are in as a society. From all the things we know to all the things we do and all the things we try to do. So decolonization becomes a complicated topic because some people believe that it is a very old topic, and that has to do with independentist struggles, in the case of Venezuela, with the Spanish colony, with the Spanish monarchy, and with some countries of Europe. But that's not the case. It has to do with materiality, with what we use every day in this world. We must solve this problem in unison. We must understand that there is only one world, one humankind. Now, I would like to play the song In Order to Walk Together. It is a song that talks about the need of knowing that even though it is a threat to walk together, even though we doubt ourselves and we reject what is different, when we condemn the things that are not normal to us, the only way to overcome this contradiction of the capitalist model is in unison, to be unified. It is necessary to be unified. I don't mean that we all have to be dressed the same, we all have to eat the same, think the same, say the same thing. No, that is not the issue. It is a worldwide view. We are talking about the fact that we are all human beings, we all have a stomach, that we sometimes get hungry, that we have a brain that sometimes asks for knowledge, a brain that says that something hurts. We all have a desire to live. Human being by nature wish to live. We don't want to commit suicide. I mean, we don't want to satanize human beings who have taken their lives away. It's just not a natural impulse to commit suicide. On the contrary, we try to survive. So we must adapt to the situations. That is one of our attitudes as live human beings. We must adapt to life to make progress, to survive. That is one of our attitudes as live human beings. So I repeat, please let us listen to the song In Order to Walk Together. I don't know if Jade or, yes, Jade? Okay, so you can play the song, the video, In Order to Walk Together. In Spanish, Andar Juntos.
que siento que me gustas mucho. Me lo transmite el palpitar. Cuando te veo siento un impulso.
Excuse me, could we stop the video, says Mr. Primera.
En este mundo hay mucho injusto que persiste en reinar. Si los enfrentamos juntos, amor, habrá más frutos por cosechar, más esperanzas por reclamar.
Mr. Primera is muted. Can we let him know that he is muted? Excuse me. Mr. Sandino Primera's microphone is on mute.
Sandino, please unmute yourself.
Disculpa, gracias Jade, gracias Jade.
Excuse me, thank you, Jade. I'm sorry. I was saying that we were apologizing. We stopped this song because this song has a video. It took a lot of work to carry out this video. And in that video, we illustrate our childhood. We illustrate an important part of what was the decolonization process in Venezuela and our view of the decolonization process worldwide. That is the video that we are going to watch. We're going to take the opportunity. We're going to show this video in the end, and we're going to answer questions as well after the video. Yes, that's what we're going to do. Well, by the way, over here we have some questions. Samuel Torres says, what is your opinion and what we should do to achieve that cultural change, to adopt the culture language that is quite far from our reality? I'm talking, for example, about the language where today they say delivery instead of entrega, coaching instead of training, bullying instead of harassment, and also how to celebrate the Halloween, etc. So they are asking how we can overcome that language, those terms, the use of those terms. Then we have another question. There are many greetings, by the way. They say, Sandino, do you think that we can define arts for a whole country? How can we combine culture with technology? Excuse me, Pablo, how did that question begin? It is one same person. It says, do you think we can define art for one sole nation? The other question is, how can we combine culture with technology? Somehow you talked about this topic, so these are the comments. Likewise, regarding Giordana, they say that it would be good to invite culture promoters and writers from Venezuela to China for them to make a cultural exchange. Those are the questions that I have here right now in the meantime. Well, very quickly, I'm going to answer. So who has to do that transformation? All those examples that the person wrote make us laugh because they're quite actual. I mean, they use the English language, English terms, and it makes some sense to us because who has domained this territory has been the United States. The United States is the one that has been invading our country by using terms that have to do with emotions. That is why we like to separate arts from culture, because the regimes that are in favor of the imperialism, the sectors of that type of culture, they know very well where they can point to in order to affect the emotions of people. And arts are elements and aspects that affect the emotions of the person. I mean, they can make you happy, they can make you sad, they can uplift your mood, and the other way around. For example, through the cinema, they transmitted the way they see the world. So in order to feel superior, in order to feel better, and through the movies and through the music and literature, they began to make us feel a bit inferior. So we feel that speaking in English, it's a symbol of superiority. Like, for example, saying delivery sounds better than saying servicio a domicilio in Spanish. People say, oh, that's cool. And that makes people feel better instead of saying, oh, qué bueno in Spanish. So who is responsible for this? The whole society is responsible for this. There are figures, there are higher authorities, and the constituent power, the society as a whole, wherever there is power, they are the ones who have the higher capacity to execute transformation processes that are specific. And they must promote other subjective processes, etc. So the transformation process is something that has to be done by all of us, by the society. We must demand the people who are responsible in the constituent agencies, in the ministries, in the institutions, in the executive power. They must apply what we are demanding them. The government, in turn, must respond to those demands that we make to them. So this is a responsibility that belongs to all of us. And it should not only be done in a prohibitive manner. We must improve the quality of our reading, the quality of our titles, the educational system. We must improve the quality of our movies because they affect the people's emotions. Our audiovisual proposals must be improved. The exhibition spaces as well as the creation spaces must be improved in order to achieve a new culture. We must improve. We have to improve. We cannot begin a transformation process without recognizing what was bad in the past. You cannot transform something if you don't accept what was bad in the past. If you think that you have a tumor in your stomach and you think that you are always hungry and you eat, but you still feel hungry, then you will think that you will have that tumor forever. So the same thing happens. The failure in the social system has to be improved from the root base. Otherwise, people will repeat the same lifestyle and the same habits, and that has to do with culture. So arts can affect and have an influence, an important influence. The pro-imperialists The pro-imperial regime knows this very well, and they have dominated us for centuries. The other question was if art can be combined with technology. Well, we believe that in fact the knowledge is art. I mean, to be able to get the data to build a cell phone, that is something that is impressive. It is a virtue of a human being. It is not a disadvantage, on the contrary. A disadvantage would be for that human being to be focused on the technology and to promote the consumption of that technology to continue being the same society that we are nowadays. An erroneous society, a failed society of capitalism in any case. But it is a virtue. Counting on that technology is a virtue. To be able to hegemonize the revolution, it is very important to use technology to hegemonize in the struggle against capitalism, because capitalism defeats us every day. So in that case, it is important to be aware that technology cannot be our enemy. In any case, we must be aware of where the materials are coming from, where the material to manufacture cell phones and computers are coming from. And we have to be more aware of the materials that we are using to take care of them and to see how we can retribute those sectors where we get the coltan from in order to manufacture cell phones, screens, etc. There should not be a war. Those who promote a battle or a struggle in that sense, I believe that those persons are simply stuck to the setback because they're stuck to something that has not happened during the last 300 years. So the knowledge is appropriate. Culture is focused or is at the hands of the experts of the fine arts, etc., etc. So we must make progress in the conditions and in the current circumstances. As I said before, the live human beings, our success as live human beings is our capacity to adapt without being able to be weak. I mean, we have to make progress. Sandino, there is a comment that our comrade was mentioning from Canada. She says that regarding the pandemic, people have begun to plant their seeds in order to look for to achieve the food sovereignty. There's another person that made a comment that has to do with a concept that has to do with the Nahuatl nations. So they are talking there about completeness, about a concept that you mentioned that has to do with colonization. Sandino, I wanted to propose you and all the rest of the people to give the floor to Giordana, because the people in China are asking to listen to her with a poem. And then we will go back to you, Sandino, for the final closure. So next we would like to give the floor to Giordana, and then we will give the floor to you, Sandino, for you to close this meeting. So you can close this meeting in the end with your songs. So we will give the floor to Giordana. Well, thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Sandino, for such a presentation. I'm taking notes, and I must say that I do believe that we must stop, rethink, study what we've done so far, and try to improve and take care of quality. Yes, otherwise we will become hackers in a system. But we have to be aware of the fact that our horizon is to achieve transformation. I completely agree with you on that fact. Well, next I'm going to read a poem. This is a poem that was published in an anthology of the ALBA TV publishing house in Italy with the UNEAC in Cuba. And with an institution of Venezuela. This poem was written by myself right after the death of George Floyd in the United States of America, a death that was highly broadcasted. He was terribly assassinated by the repressive police forces of the United States of America. And this event unleashed a series of demonstrations of organizations and of the people in general in the United States and in the world against racism. The poem is called Magma. It has an epigraph that says, I, in particular, remember some eyes, some warm, smooth pebbles, and a voice that said to me, go out to this hell, by Damaso Ogas. I devour stories to catch a glimpse of a bull. That fear of the formless, I do not know if it is human or animal. The wild tearing of the viscera can encrypt a certain order. The routine of the beast draws a controlled atmosphere. The cataclysm tinges a total rhythm. But I prefer the plasticity of suspicion. That's why I don't believe in the voice of God. Also, the Big Bang is a beautiful, sonorous story, as fantastic as the harpoon in the whale. In that opening of figurations, the magma that sustains us is sheltered. Those who lapidate history under a single shelter usually justify objection. They suffocate because they have lost the capacity of astonishment when in front of whetstones. The tongue that pronounces the vital instinct has been mutilated. It cannot heal the ravages of the poisoned banquet. They stand torturing themselves while hissing with shivers of hatred. I feel no pity for the idiot executioner. I do not admit his nature. If any impetus confronts me with the beast, I will wield it against him and his equals. In this interstice of history, there is no room for the insects of indifference. I do not allow myself defenselessness. I am not ashamed of my violence. I am not afraid of the opacity of the horizon. Perhaps we are arcana of a spiral plot. I play my game with my tongue, savoring the party, because my card redeems the wasteland where common people and great persons breathe all together. I will carefully keep the howl of the fallen. In their memory, I shake the bowl where the magma that will restore the air will boil. Well, that was the poem. Thank you very much. And it has been a great pleasure to share this space with all of you, with Sandino and with the rest of the members who are in this meeting. Thank you. Giordana, would you like to add a comment? After hearing your beautiful poem, would you like to make a comment?
Did you want to make a closing comment? Well, thank you very much. These connections are very important. I thank you all, those in China. Someone said that we need more poets in China to translate them into Chinese. That is an excellent idea. We need to connect the poetic voices. So welcome this idea. I think that this has been a very enriching seminar. We need to continue thinking how we hack the imposed culture. And we cannot lose hope. As Gramsci said, we are intellectually pessimist, but we need to remain optimistic, to transform things, and that should be our horizon. Everything should be changed, but the horizon must be clear. As long as the horizon is clear, we can then, little by little, hacking this culture and be better. And arts, culture, they contribute a lot to this progress. Thank you, Sandino. Thank you, brothers and sisters, colleagues. And Sandino has a last comment to make. So, Sandino, you can take the floor. Well, I think everything has been said in the sense that we recognize who we are. We know what we do not like in our society. Mindful of that, we cannot lose sight of what has to be done. We need to vent our ire and continue moving. Everything is to be done. We need to start afresh. That cannot diminish our will to save as a species. This is true. This is very true. It is not an exaggeration. Society today is naked. It's a system that doesn't work. So society needs to demand the governments that they move forward in the transformations required by each territory. So thank you again for this wonderful initiative, to all of you who made possible this work. Our friends in China, I know that it is late and you still are there in solidarity, accompanying these initiatives. Thank you very much. Hopefully you will come to Venezuela soon so we can interact in person. Thank you, Pablo, and the Simon Bolivar Institute for insisting and continue with this 15th session of this seminar. You can count on us always. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandino. We need to be thankful, and there are reasons to be thankful. Thank you, Giordana, and yourself for participating in this seminar. We have tried in this seminar to be very transparent and authentic and tell the truth about the problems of the revolution. In my case, as Uruguayan, I've always seen the Venezuelan people to be open, without makeup, with a clean face, and that's exactly what we have tried to do here in this seminar. So thank you to the people of China, of the university, for enabling us to have this experience. Thank you again, and to inform you that next Wednesday, we are going to have an excellent experience, since we are going to have the experience of Iraida Vargas, Mario Sanojas, two very cherished academics and scholars for the revolutionaries in Venezuela, the long march towards the communal city. In this purpose of understanding each other, to overcoming the rentier culture, the capitalist culture, then it is a new invitation to debate, to discuss, and to continue creating bridges of solidarity between Venezuela and the world, and particularly with China. Thank you very much. Fraternal greetings. Jade, I do not know if you want to share some final thoughts, and Hernan as well.
No sé si nos han escuchado las compañeras allá. Si no, Hernán.
Are you listening to us?
Presiento que me gustas mucho, me lo transmite el palpitar. Cuando te veo siento un impulso, amor, de combatir toda desigualdad. En este mundo hay mucho injusto que persiste en reinar. Si los enfrentamos juntos, amor, habrá más frutos por cosechar, más esperanzas por reclamar. Es aceptar al mundo en su conflicto, su realidad. Aún así siento que justo es hoy el mejor día para luchar. Si quieres que andemos juntos, tendremos que superar y los disgustos, amor, que este sistema nos provocará. Ahí vienen las tripas a revolverse una vez más. Oh, 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 oh. Pero será un reto andar juntos, sobre todo porque nos tememos los unos a los otros, tememos lo que es distinto, rechazamos lo diferente, condenamos aquello que no nos parece normal. Pero somos tan distintos, somos tan iguales, somos tantas, somos tantos. Y aún así, mira cómo debemos andar juntos. Mayor reto, ¿no? Andar juntos. Si quieres que andemos juntos, tendremos que superar la tristeza y los disgustos que este sistema si quieres
培元可以关了啊。
别关，先别关啊。So, Hernan, would you like to talk to Carol here? And actually, we have Rosie from Mexico, and we have Victor Gijon from Ecuador. So, if you like, you can speak in Spanish.
Oh, that's great.
我们其他的我们可以关掉那个录音了。
停了直播。
Oh, that's great. Eso está muy bien.
Hey.
Que estén aquí. Un abrazo.
Muchas gracias por este maravilloso espacio que nos da esperanza, queridos. Estamos juntos.
Así es, así es. Además, mucho gusto de saludarte, Rusi. Justamente estábamos hablando.
And we are very happy. I was discussing with Sandino. He wanted to share with you. Thank you. Excellent. We will be in touch. No problem. Fine.
Carol, I'll be in touch with you for the possibility of the chance for Winnipeg discussion that you are arranging.
Yeah, that'll be just great. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Welcome.
And for Jade and Kinchi, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm so happy to see you, Victor.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Chaito.
好了，可以关了。
Ciao, ciao.